If legends could talk, what would they say? What have they already said that the world never heard? Sit back for the next 30 minutes and learn something new about a legend in his own right. I'm going to tell you the story. Let's dive in. In 1973, John Wayne picked up a pen and wrote a letter that he never intended the world to see. Picture him at his desk. The Arizona light going gold outside the window. The kind of evening quiet that only exists in the desert when the heat finally breaks and the dust stops moving and everything goes still. A glass of something on the desk beside him. And a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, finally deciding that carrying it in silence is no longer something he is willing to do. He is 66 years old. He has already beaten lung cancer once. He has made over 170 films. He is the most recognizable face in American cinema and one of the most recognizable faces in the world. And he is sitting at a desk writing a private letter to a man 30 years younger than him because he believes something sacred is being destroyed and he cannot stay quiet about it for one more day. The man he is writing to is Clint Eastwood. And what that letter said, and what it revealed about the final years of old Hollywood, is one of the most honest and most overlooked stories in American film history. We are going to tell that story today. All of it. The letter itself. What drove Wayne to write it. What Eastwood did when he received it. And what happened in the 20 years that followed that gave that letter the most unexpected answer it was ever going to get. But before we get there, you need to understand the world that produced that letter. Because 1973 was not an ordinary year in America. It was a year when the country was exhausted in a specific and bone-deep way that is hard to fully describe to people who did not live through it. Vietnam had been bleeding the country for nearly a decade. 58,000 Americans dead. Hundreds of thousands more coming home carrying things that had no name yet. Things we would eventually call post-traumatic stress, but that in 1973, most men just called the weight they carried and did not talk about. And then, in 1971, the Pentagon Papers landed. A mountain of classified documents that confirmed what a lot of people had suspected for years. That the government had been lying. Not making mistakes, not misjudging, lying. Deliberately and consistently to the men it was sending to die and to the families watching them go. The effect of that revelation on the American spirit was seismic. Because it was not just about Vietnam. It was about trust itself. The trust that the people running things were doing so in good faith. The trust that the story America told about itself was actually true. And then Watergate arrived on top of all of it. President caught lying, caught covering up, caught doing exactly what the institutions of American democracy existed to prevent. By 1973, the country was not just tired. It was suspicious of everything it had been asked to believe. Everything it had been asked to stand for. Every hero it had ever been handed. And into that exhausted, suspicious, broken open America came the question that John Wayne had spent 30 years answering. What does a good man look like? What does he stand for? And is it still worth anything in a world that has decided that good men were probably never real? John Wayne had his answer. He had always had his answer. And the answer was yes. Marion Robert Morrison was born on May 26, 1907 in Winterset, Iowa. Flat land, cold winters. long horizons that teach a boy early that the distance between where he is and where he wants to be is something only work will close. He moved west to California as a boy, got a football scholarship to USC, and worked summers on Hollywood film sets hauling props and moving equipment, doing whatever the job required without complaint and without asking for anything he had not earned. On one of those sets he met John Ford, a director of enormous talent and enormous difficulty who looked at this large, easy-moving young man and saw something he filed away carefully. Not raw talent, exactly. Something harder to name. The sense that when this man stood still, the world around him organized itself differently. Ford put him in the lead role of Stagecoach in 1939, and the country fell in love. Not just with the performance, with the idea behind the performance. Here was a man who knew exactly who he was. Here was a man who faced what came without looking away. Here was a man whose silence meant something and whose word meant everything. In 1939, with Europe already sliding toward war and America watching uneasily from across an ocean that suddenly felt much narrower than it ever had, that kind of man was exactly what the country needed to see on a movie screen on a Saturday night. What followed was one of the most deliberate and sustained careers in the history of American film. Fort Apache. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Rio Bravo, The Searchers, True Grit. Each one a chapter in the same long story. Each one making the same argument in a slightly different voice with a slightly different character. Good men exist. Courage is real. Code holds. And if you're willing to pay the price for what you believe in, justice eventually arrives. Maybe not today, maybe not on the timeline you would choose, but eventually. Wayne believed, not as a marketing position, not as a calculated artistic stance, but genuinely and all the way down to the bone, that the stories he told served a purpose beyond entertainment. The Western was instruction. A civilization passing down to its children what it believed a man was supposed to be. What it looked like to face hard things without flinching. What it cost to stand for something when standing cost you something real. And why the cost was worth paying. He took it on himself, whether anyone asked him to or not, to be the keeper of that story. For 30 years the country let him. Because for 30 years the country needed exactly what he was offering. But by 1973 the country had changed. And the man who had been arriving on horseback to save things was starting to feel like a relic of a world that no longer existed. And into that space, with that specific cultural vacancy left by the collapse of American certainty, rode a very different kind of man. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31st, 1930 in San Francisco. His family moved constantly during the Depression years, his father following work from city to city, the way families did when survival was the only thing on the agenda and nothing else could be planned for. He grew up in motion, always the new kid, always reading a room he had never been in before and figuring out quickly where he stood and what was expected of him. That quality of watchfulness, that specific alertness of a person who has learned to observe carefully before acting, would become the defining characteristic of everything he did on screen for the next 6 decades. He logged timber, he dug swimming pools, he pumped gas. The kind of work that teaches a man what the world actually costs and who actually pays for it. The Army drafted him in 1951 and stationed him at Fort Ord in California as a swimming instructor. And it was there, surrounded by men being processed and shipped to Korea, watching the machinery of war move human beings from one place to another with the indifference of a system that had no particular interest in whether any individual survived it, that something settled in Eastwood about how the world actually worked. It was not the world of John Wayne's westerns. It was harder than that. More random. Less interested in whether you deserved what happened to you. He got into acting almost by accident. Universal Pictures gave him a contract in 1954, small parts, television work, the long, slow dues paying that every serious actor goes through before the world figures out what to do with them. And then Sergio Leone called from Italy. A fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, the good, the bad, and the ugly. 3 films shot in the Spanish desert that rewrote the grammar of the Western completely. At the center of all 3, a man with no name, no history, no code you could point to, no cause he was fighting for beyond his own survival and whatever cash was on the table. He was dangerous the way a force of nature is dangerous. Not because he was evil, because he operated by rules the landscape itself operated by. Simple rules, ruthless rules. Rules that made no allowance for whether you were a good man or a bad one. Young audiences felt something click into place when they watched him. Especially young men who had watched Vietnam on television, who had seen what happened to good men in a world that did not reward goodness, who had stopped believing in the clean story because the clean story had been used to justify things that were not clean at all. Eastwood's man felt honest in a way that Wayne's man had stopped feeling honest. Not because Wayne was lying, because the times had changed the terms of the conversation. And then in 1973, Eastwood directed High Plains Drifter. A stranger rides into a guilty town. No name, no mercy, no interest in whether the people he is dealing with deserve what is coming to them. The town had watched their marshal get whipped to death in the street and done nothing. Chosen survival over conscience. And now the stranger has come to collect. He does not save them. He judges them, paints the town red, renames it hell. And when the violence comes, it does not feel like justice. It feels like the universe settling a debt that has been outstanding too long. There is a scene early in that film that Wayne could not get past. A woman is dragged into a barn. What happens next, the film shows without flinching and without condemning. The film simply moves on, as if honor was just a word people used when they wanted something from you. Wayne was not watching that film as a critic or a scholar. He was watching it as a man who had spent 40 years telling young men what a hero looked like. And what he saw on that screen was not complexity. It was a world where the thing that separated the man who protected from the man who prayed had been quietly removed. And if that line could be removed, if honor was negotiable, then what story were you telling the next generation and calling it a Western? John Wayne sat down and wrote the letter. Picture the desk again. Arizona quiet. Gold light fading outside the window. A man choosing his words the way he chose everything. Carefully, directly, without the luxury of ambiguity. The full text was never officially published. What we know comes from interviews Eastwood gave over the decades, from biographers who spoke to people in Wayne's inner circle, and from the historical record of what both men said publicly in the years that followed. The substance is consistent across every account. Wayne told Eastwood that High Plains Drifter did not represent the West. Not because the filmmaking was poor, not because Eastwood had failed as a director, but because it was telling a lie about what the West stood for, about what it had meant to 3 generations of Americans who had needed those stories and taken something real from them. In Wayne's telling, the American West represented something in the national story that deserved to be handled with honesty and care. It's the story of people building something out of nothing, establishing order in chaos, creating law where there was no law, paying for civilization with sweat and blood and a stubborn belief that it was worth building. And High Plains Drifter said the people were rotten all along. The heroes were frauds. And the only honest response to that history is fire. Wayne could not accept that, not as art, and not as the inheritance being handed to the next generation. He had spent his life building something and he was watching it be unmade. And he needed the man doing the unmaking to know that he saw it happening and that he was not going to pretend otherwise. Wayne did not go to the press. He did not call a television station. He did not arrange a public fight that would generate headlines and sell magazines. He wrote a letter. Private. Direct. Man to man. The way men used to communicate when they believed their words carried weight and that the weight of words was something worth honoring. And by every account that has survived, from Eastwood's own interviews to the people closest to Wayne, there was no cruelty in it. No insults, no grandstanding. Just the concern of a man who sees something he values being taken apart and needs the man doing the taking to understand what is actually being lost. If you read between the lines of that letter, there is a question Wayne probably never put into words directly. Because men of his generation often carried the deepest questions in silence, turning them over privately rather than speaking them aloud. But the question was there. Who comes after us? Not who takes my place at the box office. Who tells the next generation what a man is supposed to be? What stories do they grow up on? What do those stories tell them about courage and honor and what it costs to stand for something when standing is hard? And if the stories stop saying those things matter, what fills the space where those things used to be? Clint Eastwood received the letter. He kept moving. He did not fire back publicly. He did not arrange an interview to defend himself. He did not let the press turn it into a feud. He went quiet, and he went to work. Which, if you think about it carefully, is its own kind of answer. Because from Eastwood's side of the story, he was not tearing the West down. He was revealing it, showing it as it actually was, rather than as the myth said it was. Not the heroes, the people behind the heroes. Not the clean story, the complicated truth underneath the clean story. Where Wayne saw erosion, Eastwood saw revelation. Where Wayne believed the myth was worth protecting, Eastwood believed the truth was worth telling even when the truth was uncomfortable. And neither of them was entirely wrong. That is what makes this story worth telling. That is what makes that letter worth sitting with slowly. Two men who both loved the West, both took it seriously, both believed stories mattered, and could not agree on what the stories owed the people listening to them. In 1976, 3 years after the letter, Eastwood made the outlaw Josie Wales. A man who had lost everything, his family, his cause, his reason for living, and had to find his way back to something worth protecting. It had moral weight, it had a code. It had the kind of man at the center that Wayne would have recognized, even though the world around him was darker than anything Wayne would have put on screen. People who had dismissed Eastwood as nihilistic watched Josie Wales and saw something different. Something that honored the tradition even while it complicated it. And then, in 1992, 16 years after that letter, Eastwood made Unforgiven. A retired killer with genuine blood on his hands who takes one last job and has to reckon with everything he has done and everything he has been. The film does not flinch from the violence. It does not pretend the code is clean or costless, or that justice arrives without leaving marks on the men who deliver it. But it also does not say the code is meaningless. It says the code costs something. It says justice is real, but the price is higher than the stories usually let on. It says a man who does terrible things in the name of what is right still has to live with what he has done. Unforgiven won Best Picture and Best Director at the Academy Awards. It is studied in film schools around the world. It is considered by many serious critics to be the definitive American Western. John Wayne never saw it. He died on June 11, 1979 of stomach cancer at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 72 years old. In the weeks before he died, he converted to Catholicism. He had lived his entire life by a code that looked a lot like faith without the formal structure. The belief that right and wrong were real, that a man was accountable for his choices, that how you faced hard things defined what you were. At the end, he made it official. 20,000 people lined the streets for his funeral. The flag flew at half-staff over the California state capitol. President Carter issued a statement calling him a symbol of what we hope for in America: the ruggedness, the vigor, the directness. He was buried in a grave that was not publicly marked for nearly 20 years. Even in death, he was not performing for an audience. The inscription on his gravestone, chosen by his family, reads this way: "Tomorrow is the most important thing in life. It comes into us at midnight very clean. It's perfect when it arrives and it puts itself in our hands. It hopes we've learned something from yesterday." He had said those words in an interview years before he died. They were not written by someone else. They were what he actually believed about. How a man should face each day that was given to him. The letter Wayne wrote Eastwood was never answered directly. But Eastwood made Unforgiven. And maybe that is as close to an answer as the question was ever going to get. Not the answer Wayne was asking for, but an answer that took the question seriously. That said, you were right that it matters. You were right that these stories tell people something about who they are. I just think the truth is harder than you were willing to show them. Two men, two visions of the American West, both serious, both honest in their own way. And a conversation between them that played out not in press releases or public arguments, but in the work, across decades of films, in the dust and silence of the American West. The West was never just a place. It was a question that every generation has to answer for itself. What kind of man walks into town when things fall apart? What does he stand for? And is he willing to pay the price for it? John Wayne had his answer. He gave it to us for 30 years and never once wavered. Clint Eastwood had his. He is still working on it. And somewhere between those two answers is where most of us actually live. Trying to hold on to what matters, while facing a world that does not always make it easy. If legends could talk, Now you know what they would say. That is the story. That is the code they lived by. Now, some of what you just heard is documented history. Some of it is pieced together from the best evidence we could find. Maybe you believe every word. Maybe you are skeptical about parts of it. Either way, go look it up. Do your own digging. We think you will find we got pretty close. That is the whole point of this channel. Real stories. You decide what is true. If this meant something to you, there are more where it came from. Subscribe and come back. The next one is already waiting.